you've mentioned a few times the problems with starting from scratch when someone comes into a code, i.e., a new project or one that's existed for a while that has no tests. It's got the one test that Xcode generates for you, test
Oh yeah,
example, right?
the automatic.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
one. Then it's an example of how you ought to write tests, and then just don't write tests.
hmm
Um, where do you go from there? What advice do you have for folks who have that situation? Where do you start?
My policy on testing is start with the stuff that people are going to come after you with torches and pitchforks for if it doesn't work. It's you have to look at sort of like what are the most mission critical pieces of this application. If it's like, um, you know, uh, uh, if you're using an e-commerce application, if you go and you have everything working and then when you go to hit buy, nothing happens, like that's a huge problem. Like that is something where it's like that will tank your business because if everything else works fine and then you can't actually purchase anything, you don't get any money, and then your business goes bankrupt.
Mm.
And so that's something where, when I say people will come after you with torches and pitchforks, I don't necessarily just mean your users. I also mean your managers. When I was working I had a side project called Hum for several years, and we, during one of our earliest releases, I messed up a core data migration. And so the application was just absolutely crashing on launch during that migration. And people got very angry about it because they were putting, their notes for their songs and their recordings in there. And once that happened, I wrote a test for migrating every single version of the database to a new version, just to make sure, like, okay, let's make sure that this sort of automatic migration is actually automatic.
Mm.
And that gave me a much more confidence that at least for that one particular thing, I was not going to screw that up again.
Right.
And it's definitely something where, again, that like, no, so like things where if it doesn't work, your users or your managers are going to come after you. Things you broke before is another
Right.
good place to start. And just stuff where you look at it and you feel like it's super unstable. You feel like, I don't really know how this works. This is another place where you can sort of start from the outside and start working inwards, where maybe you write an integration test for something where you don't necessarily understand the whole thing, but you know what you're supposed to put in and you know what you're supposed to get out.
Right.
And so you can at least write an integration test for that, and then you can sort of get into that GUI middle part and go, okay, what is going on here? And be able to refactor with the confidence to say, okay, now I have all these unit tests that are able to test each little piece of this whole puzzle. Are all of those passing? And is that integration test that I wrote earlier passing?
Okay. So you mentioned, I mean, there's quite a lot in that one thing you've just said there. And one of the things you've picked up on is that, just getting somewhere, getting some confidence in yourself that this is actually working correctly as you intended. Something's gone wrong in the past, a bug happened, maybe you fixed the bug, hopefully. That's a good starting point to write a test, presumably, because then you can say, it happened before, it broke before, but now I have the confidence that it is fixed. It is better, it's an improvement. There might be 1,000 other bugs, but you still know that bug's fixed and tested, and you've chipped away slowly at the testing code base.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great place. And I think, one thing that I think a lot of people get stuck on is like, once they start, they want to like be like, okay, I want to have 100% test coverage everywhere. And, it's something where there's the old phrase, never let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's something where if you had 0% test coverage and now you have 10% test coverage, that's way better. It's something where you have made a huge start. You have made a huge improvement. And the more that you can improve, the better. But don't just like spend every waking second trying to like improve your test coverage number. And also like, Personally, I find that like percentages like are not really a very useful metric.
No, particularly that one. Test coverage is almost meaningless. I mean, it's nice to have, better than nothing, but you can
Yeah.
totally scam it, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I think my favorite example of this was I once inherited a code base where there was a test that literally had a comment that said, "This branch does nothing. It's just here to improve the code coverage for
No,
this." I
why?
deleted that test immediately. I was just like, and this was a code base where there was something in the README that was like code coverage must be over 95%. And it was like, okay, well then I guess we have to hit this branch that only gets hit during debug and validate that it only gets hit during debug. And it's just sort of I I get very frustrated with that stuff. People who are like, well, I have to test every single guard statement returns when something's not correct. And it's just like,
Exactly.
no, you don't. That's why the guard statements are there.
So you've got a test there to say, try and dequeue this thing from a table cell or a storyboard, and that should never fail. Like, if it can't find this thing in the table cell, you've got really big problems, right? It's not you can't fix that
Yeah.
at runtime. It's just fundamentally broken, and that's what guard's doing. That's what return's doing. Get out of there.
Yeah. And I think that's something where I really prefer to take stuff like that, pull it out into an extension, throw a fatal error in the extension if it doesn't work, and then just sort of basically be like, okay, like if this didn't work, that's going to be an immediate crash, because if it crashes loudly and immediately, you are much more likely to find the problem than if you just guard and bail out and then stuff doesn't work.